Welcome to Into the West, a Middle-earth SVG podcast where we discuss the competitive side of the game. My name is Charles, and I'm with Richard here today. We're introducing a new segment. It is the tier list segment. So uh, today's topic will be Gondor at War supplement. And as everyone knows, Gondor at War came out at the start of this current edition in early 2019. So it's coming up to 3 years now at the time of recording. We'll be ranking the 8 legendary legions from the book, and it'll be interesting to see how they are now compared to when they were released. And we'll be tiering them from S tier down all the way down to meme tier.
Yeah, here is the 8 legendary legion. So just keep in mind that these ones are, I think, the very first legendary legions that we ever received.
Yeah, so this was a new concept at the time. Before this, we were all playing the alliance matrix, so either alliances or peer lists. So this was a brand new idea, and I remember when it first came out, people were really excited to try them. And I remember there was one tournament right after this book came out where Legendary Legions was like a huge portion of the roster. Everyone wanted to try these. Rangers Ithilien was one of the ones that was talked about the most when it came out, especially at low points, right?
Yeah, I think people were excited to see an all-shooting army. At the time, as funny as it sounds, people thought shooting was not a viable competitive strategy. And I think a lot of people were like, oh, I've always wanted to do something like this. And, perhaps we spoke too soon.
Yeah, at the time, I think the only thing you could have done really was an all Mirkwood Ranger army, but you couldn't get the numbers in because they were just so expensive. But this allowed you to, even at 400 or 500 points, you could get close to 30 or more than 30 bow shots. And I think people quickly realized that playing against shooting was like shooting like this was not very fun. Uh,
Well,
and
it's fun for some players playing it, but it's never fun for the opponent.
yeah, yeah, it became so big in the meta that people were considering this legion to be filth, which was funny at the time because the whole point of legendary legions when they were introduced was to add theme to your games, and this was seen as a really filthy list at low points. And I remember running this in a small 400 point tournament, and or maybe it was 350 points, and it was devastating to my opponents. The only game in that tournament that I struggled against was another Rangers of Ithilien. Um, Recently, though, it hasn't been talked about as much, and I think that's mostly due to FAQ change about a year ago, where you now have to take Frodo, Sam, and Gollum in when you take this legion, and the three of them add up to like close to 100 and must be close to 150 points or something like that. They're pretty expensive, and at low points is where this legion is strong at. So are they still competitive, maybe at a little higher level, um, or like how would you say they tier in terms of competitiveness at this time?
Well, I think it was never really, really good, or it wasn't as devastating at high points, even pre-FAQ, because of the answers. Because when it comes up against blinding light and like elven bows, it gets outshot. Or if it comes up against an army with a lot of marches that can close the distance with D6, it doesn't do as well. Because it always shined at lower points, and the FAQ essentially took out the 100 points worth of bows, having to put it towards the heroes. I think there is maybe a little bit of room for them in like the not quite low points but not quite high points. segment, but I think the reason why we don't see it as much or almost at all anymore is because I think a lot of people have that psychological thing where, if an army is nerfed or a model is nerfed, they just don't want to play it competitively anymore. So honestly, I never played that army, so I haven't really tried before and after and see if it really has changed that much.
Right. I do agree with you that at midpoints there might be a reason to take this legion. Your biggest hero, Faramir, is a mid-tier hero. We've talked about it in a previous episode on him where he's a decent leader. It's just the army is lacking so many things, right? Most of your army is going to be defense 4 rangers, and once the enemy can get up close, especially against strength 4 armies, you're going to fall apart really quickly. But if you were to stick with the same 35 bows and then just add on 150 points for Frodo and Sam and Gollum, that would put you at about 500, 600 points. I could see this still winning some games and still like beating some opponents just by build order, just by having so many bows and certain armies not having any counter to it. So I would put it in B tier personally.
Yeah. I think if we're gonna go by definition, S tier is like, people see you at that tournament and they instantly know you're a tryhard. you're not messing around. A tier is like, I think you can definitely win the tournament, and it's like it's one of those top lists, very competitive, but maybe you're not min-maxing and it's not, the hyper competitiveness that the S is. And then B, I think I agree with you. It's very playable. It's going to win some games at a tournament, but by no means is it a tournament favorite. C, I think, is usually just starting to become under optimized. You're going to be the underdog in most matchups. And then meme is, yeah, you're doing it for the theme, you're doing it for the love of the game, or whatever other reason, So I think I would agree with you that we can put Rangers of Ithilien as of right now in B. I think even pre-FAQ, I wouldn't have put them in S on this list just because of their weakness of not being dominant at high points even before the nerf. It would have been the absolute competitive, top tier in low points, but because it's not, good at everything, then I think it went down from an A to a B.
I agree with that completely. All right, should we go on to the next one?
Yeah, so the next Legion that we received in the book is the Grey Company.
So this list, I also saw quite a bit, but I would say mostly from more thematic players. I went to Ontario for a tournament, and then also some local tournaments, and I see it here and there. I played it a few times, and I do think that it has some competitive potential, which is kind of surprising because it feels really similar to the Rangers list, and the Rangers list isn't seen as like a super competitive army because you have to take Strider. It kind of doesn't work at low points because every single model, like the cheapest model in the list, is 30 points, right? And then you also want to get the Banner of Even Star in there because it's so good. So I feel like the minimum points value that you can actually play this list at would be like 600, or I can't see it going below 500. It would be very hard to play. We've talked about this in our playstyles open topic where it's like a skirmishy kind of list where you have to micro and try to position every single model really well. It's not an easy to play army at all.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that all hero lists, I think, for the most part, are hard to become hyper competitive. And I think part of the reason is because for them to do so, sometimes it makes things unfun. Like there are legendary legions that we're not going to talk about today, like Black Riders and White Council, that at a certain point in time they were crazy competitive, but you had to play them in a certain way that is not necessarily fun. So I think that's why I think maybe Games Workshop doesn't try to make rules like that in that way. So in my opinion, the special rules for this Legendary Legion are not the greatest. And I don't think it's necessarily worth it. Like Aragorn getting a free End Earl. There's some stand fast special rules, Woodland Creature. Like those are nice, but those are all nice to haves. And it doesn't necessarily make up the fact that you're playing all hero list. You know, like if you look at the Breaking of the Fellowship, the White Council, like they just have special rules for days.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Although I think there is a third rule that is in the technically not a bonus, but it's kind of added on, and that is that you can have Elladan Elrohir in the list, where now that they're Heroes of Fortitude, you wouldn't be able to make this list normally. So having access to those two cheap hitters is nice. But yeah, it doesn't give enough. Like the Rangers, even though they get the extra attack and the reroll from the banner, they're still fight 4. But I do think that you can win some games with them. Like I played a few casual games with them. At 800 points, I beat like a 55 model Mordor army a few times. So yeah, but like you said at the beginning, where it's an all hero army, it also means that it's really weak against like siege weapons, which is currently the meta. So yeah, there's a lot of things that this list would just have no protection against. Like it doesn't have blinding light either, right? And it just only really has one playstyle. You shoot as much as you can in the beginning because you're low in model count. You want to even out the numbers. You burn the might on your rangers to kill as many things as you can, and then you fight them up close. And sometimes that'll work against certain lists, but I think there are a lot of lists that can deal with that. So what are you thinking? A C on this one?
Yeah, it felt like you were trying to maybe lean it towards a B, which you can maybe argue lower on the B list, but I think personally I would go with a C.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the next one's the Return of the King. This one is another Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli Legendary Legion. I might say this could be, arguably, this one and the following one is the most popular Legendary Legion that I've seen in this book.
Yeah, and with this one, I think the reason is because of how easy to collect it is. It's like a completely plastic army. When it first came out, the starter set had Army of the Dead in it, and you don't need a lot of models, right? It's another expensive low model count army, and yeah, it's great for beginners, and I think that's why we saw it at tournaments so much. I do think that it can also be competitive. It has some clear weaknesses, but I do think that the heroes that you have are not bad, and in the hands of a skill player, you can do some pretty scary combos, especially with all the heroic actions that Aragorn has access to, and also I think having Deadly Shot in there, having King of the Dead's Drain Soul, you have quite a few tools. It just they're all on foot, and not necessarily like the ideal kind of outfits that you have for heroes, but like they're all pretty good heroes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like you said, I think I agree with you. This is a really beginner friendly list. Like you have tough defense on all your warrior models, and if they win the fight, a lot of the times they're killing because they're striking at courage, and your heroes are just really solid. So it's kind of hard to screw up. I think the only thing is Aragorn being the leader, and he's defense 5, and I think he's also a surprisingly challenging hero to use at times. I think some beginner players might think he's easy because he's 3 attack, 3 wounds, 3 might, 3 will, 3 fate, but the free might of turn, allows you to make a lot of different decisions, and I think that's what separates like a good player controlling Aragorn versus a more green player. This one I think is a bit tough. I almost want to give it an A. I think maybe it is an A. Definitely when it first came out, I think, and people were still getting used to dealing with it, and they were surprised at how hard it hits and being so tough. I think it was an A, but do you still think it's an A at this point?
I haven't seen it in a while, and I can't comment as like a player because I've never brought it to a tournament. But I'll admit that I've lost a few games against this Legion, so um, I know it has some competitive viability. Although I can't really explain why currently it's not seen as much. Like I think our last 2 big tournaments that we went to, I don't remember seeing any. Like maybe one. And these are tournaments of like at least 50 people. So uh, I'll give it an A, just because I do still see a very good reason to take it, and there hasn't been any like things that's popped up in the meta that's like, okay, you definitely don't want to take Return of the King after this. I still think it's pretty strong.
Yeah, yeah. I think having played it a couple of times, the reason for me is if you're a veteran player, I think you get maybe tired of the play style quite quickly. There's not that many ways to play it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think I'm okay with giving it like maybe an A on the lower end. Okay, the next one. This one can be a bit controversial.
Rise of Theoden. So this Legion was everywhere, just like Return of the King when it came out, and I don't know if it's for the same reason. I know a lot of people love Charge of the Rohirrim from the movies, and you see the first time after they came out and went to Depticon, you just see, just heard people yelling death like up and down the gaming hall. People love bringing this list for theme, but I also have seen it on podium a few times, so I think this was definitely a really strong list. Uh, there is one major nerf that it had, and that was Gambling's Banner, reduced reduced from 1 might per hero that it can give within 3 inches to only 1 hero, and that was a big hit, I think. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree before that FAQ, it was firmly in S tier. Most people would say it was a very competitive list, even if you didn't play it or you thought there were weaknesses. It's just incredibly strong. I hear people being able to use 20 plus might in a single game. That's just ridiculous. There's no other list that can keep up with that level of might. So I do think that nerf was, or a nerf was necessary, but did they go too far? I don't necessarily know. I will say that we do still see it once in a while here and there, and it's not completely dead.
Yeah. Although I think it's when you do see it, it's mostly for thematic reasons, because the optimized version is hero heavy and royal guard heavy, and the few times I've seen it, the last year and a half has been like just your standard themey, Riders of Rohan kind of build. So um, I I think it's interesting that this Legion only has pretty much one special rule, right? It's just has the death rule once a game, and that wasn't the one that got nerfed. That it was a profile in the Legion, so I thought that was pretty interesting. So personally, I probably would have just nerfed that rule and kept gambling the way he is, because I haven't seen gambling all that much since, and he's in a few other legions, and I think there's very few times where he's like an auto include anymore. So I do think that they might have gone a little too far, but that's just my personal opinion. I know there are people out there that are super frustrated playing against this Legion back in the day that probably disagree with me. Um,
Yeah. And I will say that looking at the international meta and results from other parts of the world, I think it was probably more prevalent and maybe a bit more toxic elsewhere. In our local scene and the adjacent tournaments, they don't seem as prevalent. I don't think there were as many Rohan players as maybe elsewhere too. So maybe that's what made us think that the nerf wasn't, particularly necessary.
that's true. That's true. Would you still say that it's pretty competitive?
I still think it's pretty solid. Uh, but well, in our latest tournament, the Clash on the Coast, a very big and competitive tournament, I think one of the second place brought Riders of Theoden. So I think that kind of shows that, it can still yield some pretty good results.
Mm-hmm. I would give it an A, but I would be okay with a B as well.
Okay, I think I would give it an A, and I think I would even put this slightly ahead of the Men of the Dead.
I can agree with you on that. I think it has a few more tricks up its sleeve, and they're higher skill ceiling, but also just more tools as well. So
Okay, the next Legion, straight to S tier. We have the best Legion ever.
Men of the West. Why we never see this?
It's
Don't
too
know.
good. It's banned from all tournaments.
So the one good thing I can say about this Legion is I like the idea of it. Like Gondor and Rohan all on foot with some like other heroes sprinkled in there, and trying to like um, this group of good heroes making like the last stand against Mordor. But I don't think that there's any synergy in here, and that's why the list doesn't work. Like you have 3 or 4 alliances in here: fiefdoms, Minas Tirith, Rohan, and then like the 2 elven twins. But there's no like, you lose all their army bonuses, you lose all their mounts, and what you get is a fearless bubble and +1 fight for 1 turn. There's just I don't think there's a way you can make it work to make losing all those army bonuses worth it.
So just to correct you a little bit, it's not a Courage bubble, it's battlefield wide, but while Aragorn is still alive, but I don't think that is good enough either.
It's a fearless bubble, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's worth giving up so many bonuses and all the horses that you have available in the heroes for that buff.
Yeah, it's just not good enough. A lot of these heroes, like you can even argue that Aragorn, King Elisar mounted is hard to get his points back, and you're gonna put him on foot, and you don't make him more killy or more cost efficient. It's just, yeah, and then Gandalf as well. Um,
those are two heroes that are very hard to make their points back in if you're not if you don't know what you're doing. And I think putting them on foot just makes it next to impossible, I would say, to make your points back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And since you have to take LSR, you kind of already feel like you're starting off behind when you're building your list.
Yeah, and this one is probably near impossible to play at low points because there's literally no point. And then at high points, sure, you can take a few more heroes, but it's still not good. I think this one is constantly in the discussion of whether it's the worst Legendary Legion. Of course, there's some meme ones like Sharky's Rogues and whatever, but this one is a very good contention, and I don't think there needs to be much argument here.
Definitely meme tier. I think in order to fix this list to make it viable, even as a B or C, it needs a significant buff. It needs to be rewritten, I think.
Okay, so the next Legion, we have the Army of Gothmog. What do you think?
This is a classic. I know that in previous episodes, for listeners who I've listened in the past, we're not huge fans of this Legion, but I still see them. I still see it at tournaments. I still see one at every large tournament that I go to, sometimes two. And maybe it's the theme because who doesn't want to run an army, reenacting the huge Mordor army outside of Minas Tirith. I think it's got some pretty cool orc heroes in it, but what is kind of a turnoff for me is how many restrictions you have from a regular Mordor army for relatively small buffs to the list. Right? You don't have Black Númenóreans, you don't have any Ringwraiths in there, and you don't have Shelob. You're missing a whole bunch of different other heroes, and in exchange you have Gothmog's men-hating sort of buffs being increased, and then he can stand fast heroes, and then he becomes a hero of legend. I don't know if there's anything else other than that.
Yeah, but I will say, in comparison to something like Men of the West, the options given, yes, you are limited, but you can still build a pretty solid, beefy Mordor line that is pretty playable. You can't really go wrong. And the heroes that you get, Gothmog, Goroth, Guritz, Zagdush, these are all playable. And then the minor heroes, shamans and more catapult you can go. So as long as you don't take the siege bow, right? You have enough options to build, in my opinion, maybe a bit boring, because there's just not much other from orcs. But I mean, if you like the theme, and I think you can build a really solid, well-rounded force. I mean, one of the other hosts here, Alexander Kenny, he definitely runs this one a lot, and he has pretty solid results at tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's thanks to how good of a list the Mordor army is, that even when you take away so many restrictions, it's still good. And I think that the Legion primarily focuses on countering the men keyword, which you've expressed in previous episodes that you don't really like that when you have to pay for buff against a specific keyword, and this one is kind of doing that, but you are still getting really good profiles from the Mordor army. So to me, it's like playing Mordor but with restrictions.
Yeah, it feels bad for both players. If you're a man army and you come up against the army of Gothmog, you're like, oh, what a waste. And then when you're army of Gothmog and you don't come up against a man army, you're like, what am I doing here? So I think this is as B as it gets for me. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. I think the Mordor catapult being in the list really bumps it up to a B. Otherwise, I would be going C on this one. It's pretty one-dimensional, and you're losing a lot of good options from Mordor. But I think the catapult makes it a B.
Would you go before or after Rangers of Ithilien?
See, I haven't seen the Rangers after the nerf, so I still see Army of Gothmog. So maybe I would give the edge to Army of Gothmog.
I think so too. All right, the next one, Grand Army of the South. This is definitely a legion, that I hate coming up against. Doesn't necessarily mean it's S tier, but just it's one of those lists.
Yeah, there's a certain anxiety or like strange feeling that you have when you have to fight a Mumak, because no matter how good of a player you are, there is a chance where the Mumak's just going to win the heroic move off and then just run all over your entire battle line. And with the Mumak War Leader in this list, that chance goes up because he has a rule where he can cancel your heroic move. Makes it super scary. Um, the main restriction to this list is you have to take a Mumak, and so you only would be able to really do it above like. I would only want to consider taking this like above like 600 or 700, because Suladan's also in the list, and I think it's better if you take both. Um, the few times I played this Legion, I have taken both, and it's kind of a mix of Farharad and Serpent Horde, and I think the specials in this list are pretty good. Like the one where your leader gets free heroics, that one's a little bit niche, but the buffs to the Mumak are kind of nice, and also just the war leader. I think this is the best way to play the war leader. He's just a really good profile, and um, I think playing him in this Legion is better than playing him in a normal Farharad list, just because you have access to, uh, some other stuff from Serpent Horde. So I don't know. I've seen it podium once, and other than that, you don't see it a lot. But that might be because of points value. But I like this one.
Yeah, it's always hard for me because when you involve a Mumak, to me it's kind of cheesy, and nothing wrong with cheesing, you know, but it just feels like it comes down to the scenario that you're playing for these kind of lists, similar to like all hero. So personally, I wouldn't be able to give it an S or an A because I just feel like there's too many auto lose scenarios and even maybe some matchups. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do recognize that it does have a lot of potential and it can be incredibly scary.
The issue with playing competitively with a Mumak is you have to gamble a little bit, right? Because depending on the community, the terrain might not be very advantageous to you. Like if you go on top table, and I think this happened at TGX where Devin Moreno was playing a Grand Army of the South at the final game, and there were like ruins that prevent the Mumak from walking through, and he just like Devin just ended up beating him because the Mumak couldn't do what it was supposed to do, and so like um, you have to bank on the terrain being right, and that's what's really hard when it comes to being competitive with the Mumak, and also just your leader sitting in the front and being completely vulnerable to magic and shooting. That's like the target that every archer on your opponent's army is gonna focus on. So um, I'll go with a B. I think that's a really good spot for it because I can see it doing really well as well if your enemy doesn't have the counters to a war leader. A war leader is just a really solid profile.
Yeah, I think I would stick it in between Gothmog and the Rangers.
Our last one, the Black Gate opens. So this one is Would you say that you still see it, or you see it now less than when it came out?
I have seen it a couple times, definitely less than when it first came out. I think obviously when it first came out, all these ones were way more popular because we only had the eight legions, and everyone was like, "Oh, new toys!" But
Yeah.
this one is definitely much stronger at lower points. It doesn't scale at all to larger points. I've heard of people playing it higher. So, if any of the audience disagrees with us, let us know. But I don't think this should be played above, honestly, 600 points. It's probably best at like 400.
You played against a Blackgate Opens at a tournament in the summer, right? And that was 800 points.
Yeah, and I crushed it.
Yeah, you don't have access to Fury, and the buffs on your Troll Chieftain is only on the first Troll Chieftain, and so I think the army works the best when you're at low points where there isn't as much terror, and your Troll Chieftain can do more because there are less models on the table. So I think I agree with you. It doesn't scale. Yeah.
The heroes as well, like you have Malthasar, and then if you consider the Troll Chieftain as like a named superhero because of the bonus, that's only two. And then once you take them and you fill out their warband spots, it's essentially just going to be four captains throughout. And we all know how competitive spamming only captains are. Maybe 10 editions ago.
Yeah, yeah. Not great. When I first saw the Legion, I was disappointed that they didn't have Taskmasters because they were in the movie in the Black Gate scene, and I thought that would be a really nice addition, to add to the list. Like at least give it a couple more hero options. But yeah, as of right now, it's just orcs and orc captains. So I think this one is also a B. We need to weigh it a little bit of it being like pretty decent at low points, I think. But yeah, what do you think about a B?
Yeah, I like it. I actually, played it a couple times when it first came out, and I think it was very exciting because back then there wasn't as many +1 to wound bonuses. Now, you know, everyone has +1 to wound bonuses. If you don't, then you're not competitive. So I think it has some nice bonuses, like you know, giving your troll chieftain extra like heroic stats and +1 to wound that is not super difficult to get. I think those are really, really solid bonuses. So yeah, I would have to give it a B. I would even say though, if we're talking about just strictly low points, I would say this Legion is still an A in the current meta. Under 500 and under, it would be an A for me. But overall, because it just, is not competitive at, like an 800 point game that dominates our local scene meta as well, right? I can't give it too high of a score. So yeah, I agree. I agree with the B rating, but where would you put it on our current scale here in relation to these other three?
Well, considering that it was still considered good when Rangers of Ithilien was at its prime, that's saying something. uh, I'm I'm thinking it would be either before or after Grand Army of the South, because at least Army of Gothmog you can play it at all points levels. Would you agree with that? Of it being behind Army of Gothmog?
Yes, I think so. Army of Gothmog is more versatile, even though I think the bonuses are probably not as good. But Grand Army of the South, I guess it's the reverse, that you can only play it at large points.
Yeah.
So these two are pretty much tied, I think.
Okay, we'll give it a tie. So this has been our ranking of all 8 Gondor War Legions. Please let us know what you think of our tiers, and let us know if you agree with them or disagree. Thank you all for listening, and look forward to the next episode of Into the West podcast.